What are the basic types or configurations of reciprocating engines? Inline, opposed, V-type, and radial. In what position should the crankshaft be when a magneto is being timed to the engine? The piston in cylinder number 1 should be in the correct position for ignition to occur. This is normally about 30 degrees before top center on the compression stroke. What is checked on engine run-up to determine the operational condition of the engine? Idling RPM and manifold pressure, engine acceleration, maximum static RPM and manifold pressure, magneto drop, ignition switch safety check, propeller pitch change, propeller feathering, oil pressure, and fuel flow. What is hydraulic lock in an aircraft engine? Oil has drained past the piston rings and filled the combustion chambers of the cylinders that are below the center line of the engine. If the crankshaft is turned over with this oil in the cylinder, it will lock, and there is a probability that the piston, cylinder, or connecting rod will be damaged. How is hydraulic lock removed from an aircraft engine? Remove a spark plug from the locked cylinder and drain the oil out. Clean the spark plug and replace it. What are the strokes of a 4-stroke reciprocating engine? Intake, compression, power, and exhaust. What are the two main causes of a cylinder having low compression? Piston rings not seating or broken, valves not seating or burned. What is a low tension ignition system? It is an ignition system using a magneto with a brush type distributor and a coil that has no secondary wiring. Low voltage is directed from the magneto to a transformer mounted on the cylinder head, where a low voltage is boosted to a high voltage and is directed through a very short high tension lead to the spark plug. There is one transformer for each spark plug. What are some advantages of a horizontally opposed engine? Low power to weight ratio, ideal for installation on aircraft wings, and low vibration characteristics. How can you determine the firing order of an 18-cylinder radial engine? Begin with cylinder 1 and add 11 or subtract 7, which will keep the numbers between 1 and 18. What is a floating cam ring on a large radial engine? It is a cam ring that rides on a shelf-type bearing with a large amount of clearance between the bearing and the ring. When adjusting the valves on an engine with floating cam rings, the pressure of the valve springs on the opposite side of the engine must be removed so the cam ring will be tight against the bearing for the valves being adjusted. Why is valve clearance adjusted on radial engines but not on most horizontally opposed engines? Most horizontally opposed engines have hydraulic valve lifters that keep all of the clearance out of the valve train. Radial engines have solid lifters. Why are both hot and valve clearances given for most radial engines? The hot clearance is given for valve timing purposes. The timing is adjusted with the valves in the cylinder number 1 set with hot clearance. When the timing is set, all of the valves are adjusted to their cold clearance. Why is it important to preserve engines that will not be operated for an extended period of time? Moisture will accumulate in the engine, initiating the corrosion process which can ruin the engine. Preservation for temporary storage is valid for engines that will be out of service for how many days? 30 to 90 days. What should be done to the cylinders to protect them from rust and corrosion when preparing the engine for long time storage? Spray a preservative oil inside the cylinder and replace the spark plugs with desiccant plugs. What is the formula for calculating indicated horsepower on a 4-stroke engine? Indicated horsepower, Planck divided by 33,000. What is specified fuel consumption? FFC is a measure of the economical use of fuel, which is the fuel weight in pounds per hour per horsepower. What must be inspected to determine the airworthiness of an engine installation? The propeller, lubrication system, ignition system, fuel metering system, cooling system, and the exhaust system. Where can you find the correct grade of fuel and the amount of engine lubricating oil for an aircraft engine? In the type certificate data sheets for the aircraft. What are the basic steps in troubleshooting an engine installation? Know how the system should operate. Observe how the system is operating. Divide the system into smaller parts to find the trouble. Look for obvious problems first. Where do you find instructions for removing an engine from an aircraft? In the aircraft maintenance manual. What must normally be done to a nose wheel airplane before removing an engine? The tail of the airplane must be supported. What should be used to cover the ends of fuel and oil lines that have been disconnected from the engine? The correct plugs or caps. Never cover the end of a line with tape. What is meant by QEC engine assembly? An engine that has been prepared for a quick engine change. The engine is on its mount and all of its accessories are installed. A minimum of time is required to change the engines. All that is needed is for the controls, wiring, and fluid lines to be connected to the firewall. What is meant by rigging the engine controls so they have some cushion? The control on the engine component must contact its stop before the control handle in the flight deck reaches its stop. This causes the control handle to spring back a slight amount when it is moved to the extent of its travel. What are two ways of pre-oiling an engine? Before the spark plugs are installed and after the oil tank or sump is filled, turn the engine over with the starter until oil runs out of the fitting to which the oil pressure gauge connects. Use a pre-oil tank. Air pressure forces oil through all of the passages until some of it flows from the oil pressure gauge fitting. What checks should be made to determine the proper operation of a reciprocating engine installation? Idle RPM and mixture, static RPM, propeller pitch change operation, magneto check, ignition switch safety check, and a carburetor heat check. What is the purpose of a cold cylinder check? A cold cylinder check determines which cylinder is not firing. Run the engine for a few minutes at the speed and on the magneto at which it runs roughest. Shut it down and fill the exhaust stack near the cylinder head. The cylinder with the stack that is not as hot as the others is the cylinder that has not been firing. How is fuel ignited in a diesel cycle engine? The diesel cycle engine depends on high compression pressure to provide for the ignition of air fuel charge in the cylinder.